Okie dokie. Hi, how you doing? My name is Scott, and in this video I'm going to be creating a project from scratch using SvelteKit, Tailwind CSS and DaisyUI. In SvelteKit we'll be using endpoints to query data from a GraphQL endpoint. The GraphQL endpoint we're going to do as well. It's going to be in graphql-request and it's going to be a simple blog project, but we're going to go over a lot of concepts and techniques you can use in SvelteKit, which will be really helpful to use along the way. So, ready to get started? Let's go. Okay, I'm going to get started by setting up the backend first of all. I'm going to go to graphql-request.com and log into my account. And I'm going to pick the blog starter template and create project. I'm going to give it a super serious name. I'm going to leave the include template content checked. If you want to add your own content, you can uncheck this. For the purposes of this course, I'm going to leave this checked. I'm going to pick my CDN, which is Europe. Then I'm going to click create project. I'm going to pick the community pricing plan. Hit select. And I'm going to invite my team members later. Okay, so this is the project dashboard. You see there's a couple of items checked off on the list here already. The schema has been set up. Let's go over to that. So we have authors, pages, posts, and SEO. The schema defines the data we're going to be querying via the GraphQL API. If I go over to the content here, we have the pre-populated information here ready to be queried. We have the assets and we have the API playground. I'll be defining some queries in here soon once I have the project set up. For now, I'm going to leave it like this and I'm going to get started creating the SvelteKit project. So I'm going to hop on over to my terminal and I'm going to use npm init, SvelteKit next, and then give the project a directory name. One thing to note is that at next will go away once Svelte is out of public beta. npm init Svelte will then be your one-stop shop for creating server-side rendered projects, client-side rendered projects, and Jamstack projects. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to select skeleton project, no to TypeScript, no to ESLint, yes to prettier. And I'm going to follow the next steps on the CLI here, which is CD into the project directory. Then I'm going to npm install. Then I'm going to initialize a new Git repo. And now I can open up my text editor. I use VS Code. The dot here denotes to open up in the current directory. Okay, you can see that all of these files here have a U next to them and they've been updated. I'm just going to pop out my sidebar, which is hidden at the moment. I have this hidden. I navigate around VS Code with the keyboard a lot, so I have anything which I don't use out of the way so it's not distracting. So when you hear me say I'm going to use the source code sidebar, I'm going to be using a keyboard shortcut to open it and the same for closing it. So I'm just going to hide the action bar again, and I'm going to go over to the source control panel. And here you can see all the files which need to be committed to Git. I'm using conventional commits, which is a VS Code extension. This just helps for better commit messages in your project. This is going to be a new feature. No scope. Introduce new features. And I'm going to write a short message. And I'm not going to provide a longer description. I'm just going to hit enter. And there's no breaking changes, so I'm going to hit enter again. That's it. The project is now committed to Git. So let's take a quick tour of the project. I'm going to open up the Explorer tab. So let's just go through these files. We have the Svelte config. I'm not going to need to worry about this until later on in the course when I'll be using things like Svelte add and also when I add Tailwind for pre-process. For now, this is fine. Let's go over to the package JSON. In here, you can see I need to add a new name. And down here, we've got the scripts I'll be using. I'll mainly be using dev. Build and preview I'll be using later when I'm going to deploy to production. There's also a lint script. I didn't install ESLint, so this isn't going to be helpful. And there's also format with Prettier. I'm going to come on to that in a second. Over here is the JS config file. This is where you can add aliases for paths in your project. So say if you have an API folder, you could alias it here. There's the Prettier RC file. I'm going to replace this with my own configuration. You don't have to use this. This is just for presentational purposes for this course. There's also a git ignore file, a static folder for static assets, and the source folder where I'll be doing the majority of my work. Let's go over to the app.html. So you may have noticed in the Svelte config file here, this hydrates to div id Svelte. Over in app.html, this is div id Svelte. And when SvelteKit builds, it will put all the pages and components into this div here. Also, the Svelte head API. This is for if you're adding titles to your pages and meta tag information for SEO purposes. This will get populated here. Okay, now onto the roots folder. The roots folder is where the majority of the coursework is going to happen. In here, I'll have things like endpoints and pages and routes to dynamic pages. If we take a look at the index file, you can see it's very much like vanilla HTML. This is one of the great things about Svelte and SvelteKit. It feels like you're writing in a .html file. One last thing I want to do before I move on to configuring Tailwind is just run the Prettier formatter. So I'm just going to go over to my terminal and do npm run format. And then commit those changes to Git. I'll walk through these again, but as we progress through the course, I hope you understand what I'm doing here. So for this change, this is going to be a style change. No scope again. And improve the structure and format of the code. I'm just going to say run Prettier. And I'm going to go through the rest of the options, just the default, enter, enter, enter. Okay, that's it for the tour of the project. Now I'm going to be configuring Tailwind and the GraphCMS client I'm going to be using for the endpoints in the project. Okay, now I'm going to set up the additional configuration for Tailwind. I'm just going to hop over to my terminal. And this is great utility for configuring Tailwind with a SvelteKit project. It's called SvelteAdd, and you configure it with npx. Now if I go over to VS Code, we can see the changes it's made. So in my source control panel here, it's added a Tailwind config. It's updated the Svelte config file with pre-process here. It's added a post CSS config file. Added the additional packages to the package JSON and some additional Prettier formatting by the looks of it. It's added a app.postcss file. I want to change this to app.css. That's fine. And it's also created a layout file for us. And this is what it uses to bring in the postcss file. Let's just format this a bit nicer. And this uses a slot. So we haven't covered slots yet. A slot can be used to wrap your pages and components. So at this level here, this is like the top level. So this basically wraps the whole project. We'll go into more detail about adding like a navigation bar to this later. But for now, just know it's here and what it does. I'll try to demonstrate this once we get the rest of the dependencies installed and we start the dev server so we can take a look at the project. For now, let's just commit this to Git. Okay, now that's committed, I can close that diff file. There's several other dependencies and plugins I want to add, primarily Graphql-request, but then there's also DaisyUI and Tailwind CSS Typography. So I'm just going to step over to the terminal and install those now. So I'm going to use npm install dev, Graphql-request, the JavaScript implementation of the GraphQL language, which is GraphQL. I'm going to add env-cmd, which is what I'm going to be using for environment variables. Like I said, I'm going to add DaisyUI and the Tailwind CSS Typography plugin. I'm going to hit enter. Now those are installed, we can take a look at the project again. See that we've only got the package.json updated this time. Close that. I think now will be a good time to spin up the dev server and take a look at the project. I'm going to use npm run dev. And you can pass additional parameters here with the dash dash. And you can do dash dash open to open a new browser tab, and dash dash port, specify the port you want to run the local host on. I'm going to say 3333. If I hit enter now, this should open up the browser. And it looks like I need to npm install the dependencies I added. And one other thing I'm going to need to do is create an empty .env file in my project. If I go over to the Explorer and just go down here and create a new file, which is .env. This is where I'm going to have the API endpoint to my GraphQL API. If I go back over to the terminal now and try run an npm run dev command again, we get the browser tab open up and the quick flash of the unstyled content now, and then the default Tailwind styles here. I also installed DaisyUI. I've not configured that yet. Let's just take a quick look at DaisyUI. Let's go over to the components here and go over to install. And you'll notice that I need to add it as a plugin to my Tailwind config here. I'm also adding the typography plugin as well. So I'm just going to copy this and paste that into my Tailwind config file. With the plugins here. Paste that in. Hit save. Now if I go back over to the browser and hit refresh, we see that the DaisyUI default theme has been applied here. I can change that if I go over to the themes here with the HTML property here. It says the default is light, but this looks like the dark theme. Anyway, let's just change that over to something a bit lighter for now. I'm going to go back over to VS Code, open up my app.html file, and put that property in the HTML tag, and change this to corporate, and go check out the browser again. Maybe hit refresh. There we go. So we've got a bit of a lighter theme going on. Sweet. Okay. Now I've got a lot of the configuration out of the way for styling and the dependencies installed. I can start going about retrieving the data from the GraphQL endpoint. I'm going to do that by defining a GraphQL client in my project. I'm going to hop over to VS Code again. And I'm going to create a new folder and file in my source directory here. So if you click on new file, you can also create folders at the same time. So I'm going to create a lib folder, and I want to have a GraphQL client. And this is where I'm going to define the GraphQL client from graphql-request and export it as a variable so I can use it throughout the application, throughout the project. I'm going to say import. It's a named import, so I'm going to use the curly braces. And this is going to come from GraphQL-request. So I'm just using the VS Code IntelliSense here. I'm going to say GraphQL-request, and you notice I left this empty. This is so I can use the VS Code IntelliSense again. If I say GR, then I can pick out GraphQL client here and hit enter. Now I'm going to define my GraphQL client. And this is going to be a new instance of the GraphQL client. So it looks like Copilot is trying to help me out here. I'm just going to hit tab, but I'm not going to need this. I'm going to close in parenthesis there. So with Vite, which is what SvelteKit is built with, there is environment variables. Let's just go over to the Vite page here. And these are defined with Vite underscore as a prefix to the variable name. Now, because these are exposed on the client, I want to stay away from this. So I'm going to be using env-cmd to use the environment variables in the .env file. So what does that mean? First of all, I'm going to need to get my GraphQL endpoint. So if I just close this and this, and I go over to my GraphCMS project and go down to the settings here. And let's pop open the sidebar. There is API access, and this content API is my GraphQL endpoint. So if I go to a new browser tab and paste that in, it's my GraphQL endpoint which I can run queries against. And I know this isn't a big deal because this is a public API endpoint. I want to get into the practice of using an environment variable which isn't going to be exposed on the client. So to do that, I'm going to take my content API URL here, and I'm going to go over to my end file. I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to give this a variable name of GraphQL endpoint and save that. And I'm going to copy that variable because I'm going to use it in a file. So I want to get that GraphQL endpoint variable into my GraphQL client here. I'm going to do that by declaring a variable. So I can now use this GraphQL endpoint in my client here. And I'm going to hit save on that file. Okay, now the client is set up, I'm going to need to give it a GraphQL query. So to do that, I'm just going to hop on over to the GraphCMS project and go to the API playground. Let's close this sidebar. And I'm going to want to define a query for all the posts. I'm going to add some curly boys. And this is going to be for posts. So you'll notice as I'm typing, I get the suggestions which turn up here. So I can arrow up and down and then hit tab to select it. So I have posts, and I'm going to want to return the title, the slug, the date, the excerpt, any tags relating to it, and a cover image. For now, I'll just get the URL, but further down the line, I'll be using the GraphCMS Asset Transformations API to size the images for us on the client. That's it for now. Let's just hit Control Enter to run the query. We can see that the information coming back is very much like JSON data. I'm going to need to define this now in a HTTP GET method. So I'm going to go back over to VS Code and define this GET method in my roots folder over here. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to have a folder for posts. And the file name is going to be index.json.js. So the file notation here is that the .json is the return type of the GET request. I'm going to hit enter. Now I'm going to define my GET request. So I'm going to need the client. And this is going to be $lib. And it's going to be GraphQL client. Now I'm going to go back over to the import and bring in the client. And I'm going to define the get function now. And in here, I'm going to use a try catch. And I'm going to define my query using the GQL tag. Whoops, not in there. I'm going to use IntelliSense again from VS Code to import GQL tag from Graphql-request here. The query goes in backticks. Let's just go back over to GraphCMS and copy this query and paste it in here. And I'm going to want to structure posts from the GraphQL client request, passing in the query. And this is going to return a status of 200. And the body is going to be the posts. And for the catch here, I'm just going to do a return with an error message in the body. Okay, save that. So now I have my client defined and my endpoint. My environment variable isn't going to be loaded in just yet because I'm not using env-cmd. So I'm going to go over to my package JSON here, and over in the dev script, I'm just going to add this env-cmd command here and hit save. So next time the dev server runs, it will load up the environment variables from the .env file. Let's go over to my terminal and kill the dev server as it is. Now I can kick off the dev server again. I'm not going to open it in a browser tab because I've already got it open. And just for reference, this can be shortened further from --port to just -p. Now I can hit enter and run a dev server. So if I go back over to the browser now and go over to the tab, I should be able to go /posts.json, and this will give me the response from the GraphQL API. Sweet. So now I can go about getting the data from the posts.json endpoint here and displaying that on the index page. So I'm going to hop on over to my text editor now, and in my index.svelte file, which is the root of my project, I'm going to want to do a browser fetch from the posts.json endpoint. And I can do that in SvelteKit by defining a script with the context of module. Now the code in between the script tags here will run before the page loads. So in here I can use the SvelteKit load function, which is async. which is an async function. And in here, I'm going to want to destructure the fetch API. And then in this function, I can make a request, which I'm going to be expecting a response from. So I'm going to say res. So I'm going to say res. And I'm going to await the fetch from the posts from the posts.json endpoint. If the response is okay, then I'm going to destructure posts from the response.json. And with that response, I'm going to return it as props with the posts body. I'm going to hit save. Now with the props being returned from my endpoint, I can receive those into the page here via a script tag. Where I'm going to put export let for the posts. And this means that the page is accepting the posts, which is being returned from the context module here, which runs before the page loads. And you'll see that I am getting a squiggly line under my post here because the variable is not being used. Just to test that this has worked, I'm going to wrap this in a pre-tag. And I'm going to put posts in here and save that, and then go over to the browser and check out the index page. So if I go back here and maybe hit refresh, I get the same JSON response as what I had in the endpoint. So this is good. This means that I can now work with this in the index page to display the posts. Now that we have our GraphQL endpoint data on our index page, let's work at making this a bit more presentable. So I'm going to be using DaisyUI and Tailwind to style some of the parts of this. And I'm going to close the sidebar here and move this over to the right here, and then start styling this with Tailwind and DaisyUI. So we don't need this pre-tag anymore. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to use the Svelte head API to add a title for the page. We're going to give this its correct name. And if we go over to the browser and hit refresh, you'll see that the tab has been updated with the correct title. Go back over to the text editor. Let's add some styles to this H1 here. I'm going to use text 4XL with a margin bottom of 10. And we'll have the font extra bold. Hit save. Now let's get rid of this p tag here. Now I'm going to use the Svelte each directive to loop over each post in posts. So the each directive notation takes in the array you want to iterate over. In this case, it's posts. And then it defines the variable which you are going to use in the loop. I'm not going to use item. Instead, I'm going to destructure out title, plug, excerpt, the cover image, and the tags. And then inside the loop here, I'm going to use the DaisyUI card class in a div. And this is also going to take the text center. Going to have a shadow of 2XL and a margin bottom of 20. And then in here, I'm going to use a figure. This is going to have a class of px10. So px10 is padding left and right. I'm going to add a padding top of 10. In here, I'm going to have my image tag. And the source for the image is going to be in curly braces. And it's going to be coverimage.url. And the alt tag is going to be cover image 4. And this is going to be the title of the blog post inside a $sign and some curly boys. Let's hit save on that. And let's refresh the browser. See what we're working with. Okay, so we've got our cover image. Let's move this over to the left actually. We've just got our cover image at the moment with a shadow on it. Let's also add a class to this of rounded. Pick rounded XL. Now we can add a div with the card body. And in this div we can add a H2 with the class of card title. And this will take in the title prop. Let's save that and refresh the browser. Okay, so it's coming along nicely. Let's add in the excerpt in a p tag. We don't have a class for that. Hit refresh again. Now I can display the tags for the post. I'm also going to use justify center on these with a margin top of 5 and a space X of 2. So in here I can use the Svelte each directive to loop over each tag in the tags array. So Copilot's done its thing there. I just need to end this with an end each. And I can put each one of these tags in a span with the class of badge. And this is going to be the tag. I'm also going to want to add badge primary here. Let's save that and refresh the browser. Okay, one last thing I need to do here is add a button to link to the post. I'm going to do that here. And I'm also going to need to add child actions here. This is going to be an A tag with the class of button. And the href is going to be to the post root and the slug to identify the post. Put these in some curly boys in backticks, and it's going to be /posts $$ curly boys slug. I'm also going to want to add a button outline here and add the color as button primary and hit save on that. And obviously this tag is going to need some content as well, so let's just put this closing arrow here, and the content is going to be read, and we'll put an arrow in. Let's hit save on that. Refresh the browser over here. Okay, so we've got our cover image, our excerpt, our tag, and we can click on our A tag here to read the post. Clicking this now is just going to give us a 404 because the page doesn't exist. We haven't done the routing yet. Let's go back. And also, if I maximize the browser here, we'll notice that we're not doing a great job with the layout. So over in the layout file, I'm just going to add some DaisyUI classes there to have a bit of a constrained layout. If I go back on over to the text editor, let's maximize this. And if I pop out the Explorer and select the layout file here, at the moment I'm just importing the app.postcss, and this is being wrapped in a slot. So let's just quickly demonstrate the slots actually. So if I just close the sidebar here and move this over to the left, and we get rid of the slot and hit save and refresh the browser here, we notice that we get nothing at all. This is because the slot in the layout is wrapping all of the project roots. So if I put a slot in here and hit save and refresh the browser again, it will all come back. So this is a good place to put in your global layout, which you want to apply across the rest of the project. So I'm just going to wrap this slot in a main tag with the class of container. Let's move the slot up into the main tag here. And I'm also going to want to add the max width. I'm going to just set that to XL. I'm going to put in the margin left and right as auto. Add in some padding and hit save. So now if I go over to the browser and maximize this window, hit refresh, we've got a bit more of a constrained layout, and this is a bit more appealing to look at. Let's just change that title. So there we go. We've got our index page showing our posts from our GraphQL endpoint. Okay, so now I want to display the information relating to this post here. So clicking on this link at the moment gives us a 404. I want to have all post information relating to technical SEO with GraphCMS. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to hop on over to my GraphCMS project, and I'm going to make another query. And this is going to be for a singular post. And this is going to take the slug, which is denoted with $. That slug variable is used to determine the post we want to bring back. So this is going to be a string, capital S and exclamation marks. That's to say that it's required. So if I hit space, add in some curly boys here, and we want to use the post, but in here we can say where, and then more curly braces, where the slug equals the slug variable. And then here I want to get the title, let's say. So if I hit Control Enter now, I get an error message, variable slug must be defined. So I can define that in the query variables drawer here. So if I open up some more curly braces and hit Control Tab, you can see the IntelliSense brings up the slug. And in here, I can post from my clipboard the slug string from the browser tab. So let's hit enter now, and I get the title. I'm going to want some other information. I want the date, the tags relating to the post, the author, and I'm also going to want the author name, the author title, which I think is title, but because I'm already using title up here, that could get confusing. So I'm just going to label this as author title. So the colon means that it's just been labeled as author title from title. And also going to want their picture. And for now, I'll just take the URL. Let's try this now. Let's hit Control Enter. This looks a bit better. So with this URL here, if I just open it in the browser tab, we can see it's a full-size image. And as I mentioned previously, when I was doing the posts query, GraphCMS has a great feature for transforming your assets. So in here, let's just close this query variables. In here, you can pass in transformation, and this is going to be on an image. Get rid of that cursor. It's going to be an image, and I'm going to want to resize it. I'm going to need curly braces. Resize. And in another object here, I'm going to want to fit, which is flip, I think. Another height of 50 and a width of 50. So if I hit Control Enter again, I get the additional parameters being passed into my asset here. So if I go to this one, you can see that it's been resized, and that's all we're going to need for a little circular image on the post. So that'll do for now. Is there anything else I'm going to need? Oh, I'm going to need the contents. And from that HTML, I could also just get the markdown and the raw, and there's some other things in here as well, just the text. But I'll be using just HTML for this. But it's good to know you've got options. And then also the cover image of the post. But currently, I'm not sure on what sizes I want for it. So I'm just going to leave it at the URL for now. And we'll have a play around with that shortly. So let's just make sure this is working okay. Right, so now I want to use this query in an endpoint in the project. So this is going to be a lot like the get query for all the posts, but I just want to pass in that slug variable and then use that to get back the information just for that one post. So if I just pop open my Explorer tab, and this is going to be another endpoint, but instead of just the index.json, this is going to be passing the slug. So again, with the square bracket notation, this is going to bring in the slug, and this is going to be of type JSON, and it's going to be a JS file. So in here, I want to define another get function. So it's going to be a lot like the index.json. So let's just copy paste this into here. But there's going to be some additional stuff I'm going to need, such as the slug. So I can destructure that from the request.body. Let's put in REQ here for request. And I want to get the slug from the request.parameters. And I want to get my query on my GraphCMS project. Let's just copy this and replace the query here for all posts. So now this is expecting the slug variable. I'll define that down here just above my Graph CMS client. It's going to be slug, and then the client here can also take in the variables. Sweet, hit save on that. So I'm going to want to get post, not posts. So I'm going to want to get post, not posts. So here at the moment, I'm destructuring out the posts. Let's just highlight both of those. I just want this to be post. Hit save. So now if I go over to my localhost, and I've already got my slug here. If I do .json, that is all of the content from the query we had written. So I can now go about using this in a Svelte page. So let's do that now. So in posts, this is also going to accept a slug. So I'm just going to say new file, slug.svelte. And then in here, pretty much like with the index page, I'm going to need to use the context module, but I'm going to be fetching from the posts slug endpoint and passing that into it. So let's just take everything from here, copy that, and go over to my Svelte file, paste this in. So we need the browser fetch, but for the posts here, I'm going to need to pass in the slug. So I'm going to get that from the page params. So let's just destructure it up here, get the page out, and then the params on that page. I'm going to want to destructure slug from params. Now I can use that slug in my fetch request here. Let's just put this in some backticks, and it'll be posts /slug.json. So that slug we have is what we're going to be passing to the endpoint. So if I just pop open the Explorer again, we're passing the slug variable here to the JSON endpoint, passing in the slug, and that's going to give us the results for the post. So I'm going to need to change this to post here. This is post, and the props coming into the page are for the post as well. So if I hit save and do the pre-JSON tag and put in post here, hit save. Now if I go back over to the browser, we see that we've got the GraphQL response for the post we want. Let's go back over to the text editor here. Let's close that side panel. Sweet. So now I can start adding some markup to the page. Let's just move this over here, move that over there. And rather than making you go through the pain of watching me style it again, I'm just going to paste in some styles. But rather than having post.title, post.date, pulling off the values from the object here, I'm just going to destructure everything out into their own variables. This is going to come from post, not params. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. And in here, I'm going to want the title, the date, the tags, also the author. And from that, I'm going to need to get the author name, the author title, and the picture. Let's just see what else we had in the object here. That's the URL, so I can destructure that. Also, I'm going to want the content and take out the HTML from that and the cover image. So I hit save, let Prettier do its thing there. So I'm just going to go and paste in some markup now. So we'll do one for the cover image first of all. Get that in here. So we've got some classes on here to expand with the page size, just so it's a bit responsive. Then I'm going to put in a H1 with the title. Scroll down here. So I'm using the title here, wrapped in the curly braces, which for SvelteKit means it's a variable. Let's get rid of this pre-tag now. So I'm also going to put in a block for the author and the tags. Let's do this under the H1. This is just going to be picture URL. Hit refresh there. We've got this nicely formatted in here. We have the title. So just some responsive styles on this, so it looks a bit more presentable. I'm going to add in the date. Go down a bit here. So we're using the text secondary color class here from DaisyUI. And we're just formatting the date using the JavaScript data string. So let's just take a look at this without that formatting. Date is not a constructor. Oh, because I put new. Let's just take a look at that without. Yeah, so it's just a bit of nicer formatting around the date for us. Just redo that. Whoops. Sweet. Okay, so now I'm going to be using the Svelte if directive to see if there's tags. And if there is a tag, we're going to loop around each one. So using the if directive here, if there is tags, then we're going to show them in a div. We're going to put in some margin top and some spacing. Now we're just going to add the DaisyUI badge class, and it's a badge primary. We're just going to keep looping around those until all the badges are on the page here. And then last but not least, we're going to put in the article. So the article uses the Tailwind Typography plugin, which is pros. So at the moment, this looks okay. I don't know why I can't scroll to the bottom here. But I'll just take out this pros class. You can see that the Tailwind typography does a lot of the formatting for you. Let's put that back in. Save that. Sweet. So let's just check out a post with more than one tag. Go back to the index page here. And this last one here. We have our tags looking okay there. And we've got some additional styles being added into this one. So without pros, without this pros class, all of this would just be a big block of text. So now let's add in some additional pages. So if I go back over to my Graph CMS project, which is over here, and we take a look at the content model. Let's pop open the sidebar. We see that I've got one for page. So if I go to the content for page, there's currently just the one page, which is about. But I want to build on this a bit more with, let's say, an FAQ page and a services page, just so we can have them as roots in the project. Let's just do that now. So if I go back over to the content here and say create an item. So we'll have one for FAQ. The slug will be FAQ. I won't put in a subtitle. And maybe if I could spell frequently properly. Sweet. So I'm going to save and create another. And this one will be services. And the slug will be services. And that will do for the pages. So if I just say save and close. So now I can query these from the GraphQL endpoint. So if I go back over to my API playground, let's close that side panel. And I'm going to make a new query here. It's going to be for pages, some curly boys. And this is going to be from the pages model. I'm just going to hit Control Enter. I get the ID. That's not much help. I'm going to want the title, slug, and the content, which I'm going to want in HTML. Let's run that. So that should be it for that. I'm just going to go and create an endpoint in the project now. This endpoint will be a lot like all the other endpoints I've done so far. This is just going to be an index.json. So it's pretty much going to be identical to this. So if I just copy this and over in my roots, create a new folder and file. So this is going to be for pages. And it's going to be the index.json.js. And in here, I can just paste that endpoint from the posts endpoint and just replace this query here. So let's go back over to my Graph CMS project, copy this, add this in here, So my query is going to bring back the pages here. So I'm going to need to destructure that from the client. And that's what I'm going to return in the body of the request. Let's hit save on that and go back to the browser and go to, rather than the posts route, I'm going to go pages.json. And I've just got the one page at the moment because in my content model for the page, these are still in draft. So let's just select all of these and say publish. And we'll go back over to localhost again, hit refresh. I've got all the pages. So now I've got this list of pages. I can put them into a navbar and have a slug link to each of the pages I've created. So let's just create a navbar, and then I'm going to have to also get the content for each of the pages individually. So that will be another endpoint, much like the endpoint for the post.slug. And then I'll have to do another slug.svelte page for each of the individual pages. Let's just do the navbar first. So if I hop on over to DaisyUI and scroll down for the navbar, navbar, and I'm going to want to take this one. I'll just copy all this markup here, copy that and put it into a component, which I'm going to put in my lib folder. So I'm going to have a nav.svelte. I'm just going to paste all that in, and the navbar can live on the layout here. So if I just do nav, this is also imported from the lib folder. And let's just close out that component. And if I go over to my localhost browser and go to the index page, did I leave the importing nav? Try hit refresh on that. There we go. So I have a link now in a navbar, but these don't go anywhere at the moment. So let's just go about getting the list of links and putting them into the navbar here. So this will be very similar to the index.svelte here, which will use the context module to get a fetch request from the pages endpoint. Let's just copy that and put that into the layout, because I'm going to want to pass anything which is in the pages endpoint to the nav as the pages. Make sense? I hope so. Right, so let's go pages.json, and I'm going to want to get the pages here. Select that and that. So then in my script tag here as a prop, I can use pages, and I can pass those pages to my nav. Hit save on that. So then over in the nav file, I'll go to the top of the file here and have a script tag. This is going to be the pages, and let's just hit save and let Pretty do its thing on this. So now I've got the pages object, and I can loop over them in this div here and create a link for each one. Let's just close this sidebar, move this over to the left here, move this over to the right, and I'm going to change this from DaisyUI to Sparkle's blog. And for these links, let's get rid of those for now. Get rid of that hidden class and this flex class here on large screens. So in here, I'm going to want to do a each. This is going to be on the pages props. And from here, I want to destructure out title and slug. And I want one of those links actually. Let's go back here. Get one of these links, the link classes. Where are they? Here they are. Grab one of those, put that in here, and close that tag. This is going to be the title of the page. I'm going to want to put a href in here, which is going to be in some curly braces with template literal for the page slug. Let's hit save on that. And where's my bar gone? Where has it gone? Here it is. Okay, so now I've got a link for each of the pages I can create dynamically. So now if I go over to my text editor, pop out the sidebar again, and I can do pretty much the same as what I have done with the posts page here. So let's just copy this, go over to my roots and make a new file. And this is going to take in the slug, and it's a Svelte file. So in here, let's just get rid of all this markup for the post. Let's get rid of that. This is going to be slug.title. So I'm going to need to do something similar here, but for pages. And I'm going to pass in the slug, but that endpoint doesn't exist for pages. So let's go and create that now. Let's just copy the one for posts. It's going to be very similar to this. Go back over to pages and paste it in. So this is going to take a slug for the page. So let's just write out this query quickly in GraphCMS. Go back on over to GraphCMS, make that a bit bigger, and over in the API playground. So much like I've done for posts and post, I want to do pages and page. So this is going to be a query for page, and I'm going to need to take in a slug variable, and this is going to be a type string, which is required, some curly boys, and in the page where the slug needs to be in curly boys, where the slug is the same as the slug being passed in. Okay, so I want the title and the content HTML. Let's try running that. Variable slug must be defined. Okay, so go over to the query variables here and add one for about. Enter, and we get the information for the about page. So let's jack that and go back over to the slug.json endpoint. Put that in there. Now this is going to be for page rather than post. Let's highlight both of those and hit save. Now I can do a get request for any page which matches the slug being passed into this query here. So let's go back on over to our slug.svelte. This is going to get the page where the slug for the page is being passed in. So this is going to be page. Highlight all those. And then in the markup here, let's just take the head, the H1, like I had for this. Copy that. Go back over here. This is going to be page.title. I'm not going to destructure all of the bits out of there. And then in an article tag, I'm just going to use the @HTML again and bring in the page content HTML. Let's hit save on that. Now in an article, I'm going to want to put in the rows class. Right, so if I go back to my local host, maybe hit refresh. There we go. We're getting the content from the CMS, and we can have it in individual pages for the site. Sweet. I think that is it. One thing I need to do is add a home page here because there's nothing there at the moment. Just do that. So let's go back over to the nav component. Nav. Here it is. And in my each here, I just want to take one of these for home. Let's close that. Move this over here and this over here, just so we can see it happening. So I want this A tag, but I don't want one with a variable. I just want this to be home. That's going to be / and it's going to be home. Let's save on that. And my dev server's not playing, so let's hit refresh. Now I can go to the home page, the about page, FAQ, and services. This stuff over here in the left, go over to the nav bar. Where's the nav bar? Do Control P, say nav. So I can take out this. This is the nav bar end. Go over here, get rid of those, and hit save, and refresh. So we've not got those cluttering up things. So I've been neglecting committing things to Git. So what I'll do now, make this a bit bigger, pop out the source control panel, and commit all of this to Git. So one thing to note here is that my .env file is not in the Git ignore. So I'm going to need to change that. Go over to the Explorer, and in Git ignore here, I need to put .env and save that and close that. If I go back over to the source control panel, I'm not going to be committing my .env file to Git, which is handy. So let's get all this added in. So let's just bulk do it for now. This isn't a good practice, but features, no scope, sparkles. Okay, sweet. Okay, so one last thing I want to add to this project is a theme switch, which will take advantage of the DaisyUI themes. So if I just bring this up here and we go back over to DaisyUI, you can check out the DaisyUI themes here in place. So we've got the light theme, dark theme, and cupcake. Loads of nice little themes. With DaisyUI, I can take advantage of all of these in the project I'm working on. Rather than build the whole thing from scratch, I'm going to take an example I've already made, which is over on GitHub here. So this really, I've just got the theme switch component, and the theme switch component is being used in the roots folder here. So we're using the onMount lifecycle method from Svelte, and then we're putting the theme change in now. And then in this example, I'm just using the select component on the index page. I'm going to put that into the layout file of the project. So let's do that now. I'm going to need to install the theme change package. Let's go over to my terminal, kill the dev server, and npm install dev theme change. And while that's installing, I'll go back over to here and take this component here, theme select, and add it into the project. So if I go to the Explorer, and let's just close everything I've got open at the moment. Close all those. And I'm going to want to put it into the lib here. Let's call it theme select. And it's a Svelte file. And let's paste that in for my clipboard. And hit save on this. And I'll switch these classes out with my own classes. Then I'm going to add this theme select to my nav bar here. Select that. So this empty div down the bottom here, it's going to open this up and import theme select. And see if VS Code will let me import it. No, it won't. So let's just close out the component here. Try Control Space again, and just let me import it that time. Just scroll back up. It's been imported. So if I hit save, let Prettier do its thing. So this end nav bar will now contain this theme select. Let's go over to the browser and see what it looks like. Maybe I need to hit refresh here. Okay, so we've got the choose theme coming in. At the moment, this isn't really doing anything because I've not wired it up into the layout file. So let's go over to the layout now. And let's just copy what I've got in here. This is going to be the on-mount lifecycle method. And I'm going to want theme change from the theme change npm package and on mount. Let's just copy that and put that below pages here. Don't need to import post CSS again. And actually let's move let pages down to here, hit save. So now if I go back over to the browser, to my local host, and hit refresh, you see that the theme's already taken effect. Now we can switch around with all the themes we've got available to us. Okay, so there was one last thing, is that on the pages here, the title isn't updating in the tab here, and I forgot to do that earlier. So let's just go over to the slug.svelte here and change this to page.title. Hit save on that and just go back over to the browser. So this should, we have welcome for the index page. Yeah, and it's changing now for the generated pages we're getting from the CMS. All right, sweet. So that's it. We've gone through scaffolding out a backend, scaffolding out a front end, retrieving the data from our GraphQL API, adding that data to endpoints in SvelteKit, and then we've added a nice theme switch at the end. So I know it's been a lot to take in. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.